This is a story of the murder of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Marie Likens, born January 3rd, 1949 and died October 26th, 1965. She was an American teenager who was tortured and murdered by her caregiver, Gertrude Baniszewski, many of Baniszewski's children and several of their neighbourhood friends. The abuse incrementally lasted for 3 months before Likens died from her extensive injuries and malnourishment on October 26th in Indianapolis, Indiana. Likens was increasingly neglected, belittled, sexually humiliated, beaten, starved, lacerated and dehydrated by her tormentors. Her autopsy showed 150 wounds across her body, including several burns, scald marks and eroded skin. Though intimidation, her younger sister Jenny was occasionally forced to participate in her mistreatment. The official cause of her death was determined to be a homicide caused by a combination of subdural hematoma and shock, complicated by severe malnutrition. Gertrude Baniszewski, her eldest daughter Paula, her son John and 2 neighbourhood youths, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were all tried and convicted in May 1966 for neglecting, torturing and murdering Likens. At the defendant's trial, Deputy Prosecutor Leroy New described the case as the most diabolical case to ever come before a court or jury, and Gertrude's defence attorney William C. Urbecker described Likens as having been subjected to acts of degradation that you wouldn't commit on a dog before her death. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gertrude Baniszewski guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment but was released on parole in 1985. Paula was found guilty of second-degree murder and was released in 1972. Hobbs, Hubbard and John were found guilty of manslaughter and served less than 2 years in the Indiana Reformatory before being granted parole on February the 27th, 1968. The torture and murder of Sylvia Likens is widely regarded by Indiana citizens as the worst crime ever committed in their state and has been described by a senior investigator in the Indianapolis Police Department as the most sadistic case we have ever investigated in the 35 years they have served with the Indianapolis Police. The background. Gertrude Nadine Baniszewski, September 19th, 1928 to June the 16th, 1990, was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, to Hugh Marcus Van Fossen Sr. and Molly Myrtle, both of whom were originally from Illinois and were of American and Dutch descent. Baniszewski was the third of 6 children and her family was working class. On October 1939, Baniszewski saw her 50-year-old father die from a sudden heart attack. 6 years later, she dropped out of high school at the age of 16 to marry 18-year-old John Stephan Baniszewski, who was originally from Youngsville, Pennsylvania, and was of Polish ancestry, and to whom she bore 4 children. Although John Baniszewski had a volatile temper and occasionally beat his wife, the two would remain together for 10 years prior to their first divorce. Following her divorce, Baniszewski married a man named Edward Guthrie. The marriage lasted just 3 months before the couple divorced. Shortly thereafter, Baniszewski married her first husband, bearing him 2 more children. The couple divorced for the second time in 1963. Weeks after her third divorce, Baniszewski began a relationship with a 22-year-old named Dennis Lee Wright, who also physically abused her. She had one child with Wright, Dennis Lee Wright Jr. Shortly after the birth of their son, Wright abandoned Baniszewski, and Baniszewski filed a paternity suit against Wright for financial support of their child, although Wright seldom contributed to the care of their son. By 1965, Baniszewski lived alone with her 7 children: Paula, Stephanie, John, Marie, Shirley, James and Dennis Lee Wright Jr. Although 36-year-old and 5'6" in height, she weighed only 100 pounds and had been described as a haggard, underweight asthmatic, chain smoker suffering from depression due to the stress of 3 failed marriages, a failed relationship and a recent miscarriage. In addition to the sporadic checks she received from her first husband, a former Indianapolis policeman, upon whom she primarily relied financially to support her children, Baniszewski occasionally performed odd jobs for neighbours and acquaintances, such as sewing, cleaning, etc., in order to earn money. Baniszewski resided in Indianapolis at 3850 East New York Street, where the monthly rent at that time was $55. Sylvia Marie Likens was the third of 5 children to carnival workers Lester Cecil Likens and his wife Elizabeth Francis. She was born between 2 sets of fraternal twins, Daniel and Diana, 2 years older than her, and Benny and Jenny, 1 year younger than her. Jenny Likens suffered from polio, causing one of her legs to be weaker than the other. She was afflicted with notable limp and had to wear a steel brace on one of her legs. The abuse. Although Lester Likens had agreed to pay Gertrude Baniszewski $20 a week in exchange for the care of his daughters, after approximately 2 weeks, these payments failed to consistently arrive upon the prearranged dates, occasionally arriving 1 or 2 days late. In response, Gertrude began venting her frustration at this fact upon the sisters by beating their bare buttocks with various instruments, such as a 1/4 inch thick paddle, making statements such as, "Well, I took care of you little 2 bitches for a week of nothing." And on one occasion in late August, both girls were beaten approximately 15 times on the back with the aforementioned paddle, and Paula had accused the sisters of eating too much food at a church supper that the household children had attended. By mid-August, Gertrude Baniszewski had begun to focus her abuse most extensively upon Sylvia, with her primary motivation likely being jealousy of her physical appearance and potential in life. According to subsequent trial testimony, the abuse was initially inflicted upon Sylvia after she and Jenny had returned to the Baniszewski residence from Arsenal Technical College, as well as on the weekends. The initial abuse included subjecting Likens to beatings and starvation, forcing her to eat leftovers of spoiled food out of garbage cans. On one occasion, Likens was accused of stealing candy she had actually purchased. On another occasion, in late August, Likens was subjected to humiliation when she claimed to have a boyfriend in Long Beach, whom she had met in the spring of 1965 when her family lived in California. In response to hearing this, Gertrude asked if she had ever done anything with a boy, to which Likens, unsure of her meaning, replied, "I guess so," and explained that she had gone skating with the boys there and had once gone to the park on the beach with them. Continuing the conversation with Stephanie Baniszewski and Jenny, Likens mentioned that she had once laid under the covers with her boyfriend. Upon hearing this, Gertrude asked, "Why did you do that, Sylvia?" Likens replied, "I don't know," and shrugged. Several days later, Gertrude returned to the subject with Likens, telling her, "You're certainly going to get big in the stomach, Sylvia, It looks like you're going to have a baby." Likens thought Gertrude was kidding with her and said, "Yeah, it sure is getting big. I'm just going to have to go on a diet." However, Gertrude then informed her and the other girls in the house that whenever they did something with a boy, they would be sure to have a baby. She then kicked Likens in the genitals. Paula, herself 3 months pregnant and also jealous of Likens' physical appearance, then participated in attacking Likens, knocking her off her chair and onto the kitchen floor, shouting, "You ain't fit to sit in that chair." On another occasion, as the family ate supper, Gertrude, Paula and a neighbourhood boy named Randy Gordon Lepper force-fed Likens a hot dog overloaded with condiments including mustard, ketchup and spices. Likens vomited as a result and was then later forced to consume what she had regurgitated. Yeah. In what was Likens' only act of retaliation, she is alleged to have spread a rumour at Arsenal Technical High School that Stephanie and Paula Baniszewski were prostitutes. She supposedly did this because she was upset with the household for singling her out for similar accusations. While at school, Stephanie was jokingly propositioned by a boy who told her that Likens had started this rumour about her. Upon returning home that day, Stephanie questioned Likens about the rumour and she admitted to starting it. Stephanie punched her in response, but Likens apologised to her in tears, and Stephanie then also began to cry. However, when Stephanie's boyfriend, 15-year-old Coy Randolph Hubbard, heard of the rumour, he brutally attacked Likens, slapping her, banging her head against the wall and flipping her backwards onto the floor. When Gertrude found out, she used a paddle to beat Likens. On another occasion, Paula beat Likens about the face with such force that she broke her own wrist. Having primarily focused her blows upon Likens' teeth and eyes, later Paula used the cast on her wrist to further beat Likens. Gertrude repeatedly falsely accused Likens of promiscuity and of engaging in prostitution, delivering rants to Likens regarding the fitness of prostitution and women in general. Gertrude would later occasionally force Jenny to strike her own sister, beating Jenny if she did not comply. Coy Hubbard and several of his classmates frequently visited the Baniszewski residence to both physically and verbally torment Likens, often calibrating the Baniszewski's children and Gertrude herself. With the active encouragement of Gertrude, these neighbourhood children routinely beat Likens, sometimes using her as a practice dummy in violent judo sessions, lacerating her body, burning her skin with lit cigarettes in excess of 100 times, and severely injuring her genitals. To entertain Gertrude and her teenage accomplices, Likens was forced at one point to strip naked in the family living room and masturbate with a glass Pepsi-Cola bottle in their presence, with Gertrude stating to all present that this act of humiliation was for Sylvia to prove to Jenny what kind of a girl you are. Disgusting. Gertrude eventually forbade Likens from attending school after she confessed to having stolen a gym suit from the school due to Gertrude having refused to purchase the clothing for her. For this act of theft, Gertrude whipped Likens with a 3-inch wide, 7.6 centimetres police belt. Gertrude then switched her conversation to the evils of premarital sex before repeatedly kicking Likens in the genitals, as Stephanie rallied to Likens' defence, shouting, she didn't do anything." Gertrude then burned Likens' fingertips with matches before further whipping her. A few days later, Gertrude repeatedly whipped Jenny and with the police belt, and she reportedly stole a single tennis shoe from the school to wear on her strong foot. On October the 25th/26th, Likens attempted to escape from the basement after overhearing a conversation between Gertrude and John Baniszewski Jr. pertaining to the family's plan to abandon her to die. She attempted to flee to the front door. However, due to her extensive injuries and general weakness, Gertrude caught her before she could escape the property. Likens was then given toast to eat, but was unable to consume the food due to her extreme state of dehydration. Gertrude forced the toast into her mouth before repeatedly striking her face with a curtain rod until sections of the instrument were bent into right angles. Coy Hubbard then took the curtain rod from Gertrude and struck Likens one further time, rendering her unconscious. Gertrude then dragged the desperate girl to the basement. That evening, Likens desperately attempted to alert neighbours by screaming for help and hitting the walls of the basement with a spade. One immediate neighbour of the Banaszewskis would later inform police she had heard the desperate commotion and that she had identified the source as it emanating from the basement of 3850 East New York Street. But that as the noise had suddenly ceased at approximately 3 a.m, she decided not to inform the police about the disturbance. By the morning of October the 26th, Likens was unable to either speak intelligibly or correctly coordinate the movements of her limbs. Gertrude moved Likens into the kitchen and, having propped her back up against a wall, attempted to feed her a donut and a glass of milk. She threw Likens to the floor in frustration, and Likens was unable to correctly move the glass of milk to her lips. She was then returned to the basement. Shortly thereafter, Likens became delirious, repeatedly moaning and mumbling. When Paula asked her to recite the English alphabet, Likens was unable to recite anything beyond the first 4 letters to raise herself off of the ground. In response, Paula verbally threatened her to either stand up or she would inflict a long jump on her. Gertrude then ordered Likens, who had defecated, to clean herself. That afternoon, several of Likens' other tormentors gathered in the basement. Likens jerkingly moved her arms in an apparent attempt to point at the faces of the tormentors she could recognise, making statements such as, "You're Ricky and you're Gertie," before Gertrude tersely shouted, "Shut up, you know who I am." Minutes later, Likens unsuccessfully attempted to bite into the rotten pear she had been given to eat, stating that she could feel the looseness in her teeth. Upon hearing this, Jenny replied, "Don't you remember, Sylvia, your front tooth was knocked out when you were 7. Jenny then left Sylvia in the basement to perform gardening chores for neighbours in the hopes of earning spending money. In an attempt to wash Likens, a laughing John Banaszewski Jr. sprayed her with a garden hose brought to the house that afternoon by Randy Lepper at Gertrude's request. Likens again desperately attempted to exit the basement but collapsed before she could reach the stairs. In response to the effort, Gertrude stamped upon Likens' head before standing and staring at her for several minutes. Shortly after 5:30 p.m, Richard Hobbs returned to the Banaszewskis' residence and immediately proceeded to the basement. He slipped on the wet basement stairs and fell heavily to the floor of the basement to be confronted with the sight of Stephanie crying and cuddling Likens' emaciated and lacerated body after she had been ordered by her mother to clean Sylvia. Stephanie and Richard then decided to give Likens a warm soapy bath and dress her in her new clothes. Then they laid her upon a mattress in one of the bedrooms. As Sylvia muttered her final wish that her daddy was here and that Stephanie would take her home, Stephanie then turned to her younger sister, Shirley, exclaiming, "Oh, she'll be all right." When Stephanie realised that Likens was not breathing, she attempted to apply mouth-to-mouth resuscitation as Gertrude repeatedly shouted to the children in the house that Likens was faking her death. Likens was 16-year-old when she finally succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy of Likens' body revealed she had suffered in excess of 150 separate wounds across her entire body, in addition to being extremely emaciated at the time of her death. The wounds themselves varied in location, nature and severity and the stage of her healing. Her injuries included burns, severe bruising and extensive muscle and nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was almost swollen shut. Moreover, all of Likens' fingernails were broken backwards, and most of the external layers of skin upon the child's face, breasts, neck and right knee had peeled or receded in her death throes. Likens had eventually bitten through her lips, partially severing sections of them in front of her face. The official cause of Likens' death was listed by coroner Dr. Arthur Kebbell as a subdural hematoma due to her receiving a severe blow to her right temple. Both the shock she had primarily suffered due to the severe and prolonged damage inflicted to her skin and subcutaneous tissues, plus the severe malnutrition, were listed as contributing factors to her death. Rigor mortis had fully developed at the time of discovery of her body, indicating Likens may have been deceased for up to 8 hours before she was found, although Dr. Kebbell did note Likens had been recently bathed, possibly after death, and that this act could have hastened the loss of body temperature and thus sped the onset of rigor mortis. Absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. The poor girl. Hi guys, I'm the Lord of Kramer. Thanks for listening to my story and really appreciate you stopping by. Please like, share and subscribe to my channel and I will see you on the next one.